We all know and love those modern boomer shooters. You know, the ones that emphasize movement and visceral action to such an extent that they basically feel like their own subgenre? Well, before those games even had a genre to be a part of, there were dozens of Doom-likes and Quake-likes that have nowadays seemingly fallen into some degree of obscurity. And with a new boomer shooter coming out what feels like every freaking day, I think it's time that we take a look back and appreciate some of the unsung heroes of the genre. Disruptor still hasn't really gotten the credit it deserves on a whole bunch of levels. It really nails basically everything. Considering this was the first game from the now legendary Insomniac, maybe that shouldn't be too surprising though. Right off the bat, you'll see the obvious Doom-like qualities, with 2D enemies and 2D objects drizzled over the 3D polygonal levels, a wide variety of fun weapons, some of which dish out BFG levels of devastation, and an increasingly intricate and varied assortment of stages with locked doors, hidden paths, you name it. If Doom did it, Disruptor probably did too. Most importantly though, the action is rock solid here. The medley of futuristic weapons is pretty robust for the time. Hell, Disruptor's got more weapons than a lot of modern first-person shooters. Even though the game doles them out a bit slowly and takes a little over half of the game to get your hands on everything, it does turn into one of the better arsenals in the genre. Certainly of its time anyway. You've got your automatic pistol, your phase rifle, which eventually gets an alternate automatic version with 3 barrels, which is as ridiculous and impractical as it sounds in most situations. Not all though. And you've got a heat-seeking cannon, a lethal cyclone repeater, and a couple so-called unauthorized weapons that are one-time use and will absolutely annihilate everything in your vicinity with cataclysmic force. Oh, and we can't forget about the AM Blaster, which is basically Disruptor's version of a double-barrel shotgun, where pressing the fire button triggers a 1-barrel shot, and holding it down for a couple seconds charges up a double-barrel shot with twice the power. I love this thing. The shot itself has more of a pop sound to it than a typical shotgun blast, which I think is a pretty interesting sound design choice. When dealing with stronger enemies, I like charging up the double shot and hitting them with a psionic before finishing them off by releasing it. Oh, what's a psionic? Well, these are Disruptor's entirely separate set of weapons and abilities that you get to wield as a Lightstormer in the year of the future. Basically just, it's an excuse to have more stuff to do. These psionic powers are a big part of what sets the game apart from the crowd though, and they're pretty fun to use once you get the hang of them. Some of them are more useful than others, like the Drain and Heal abilities being pretty handy much of the time, and the Shield not really feeling like a worthy trade-off for how small of a window of invulnerability it provides. The Blast ability is a great way to clear out a few enemies when you're feeling overwhelmed, and even yields a little bit of psionic energy that you can earn back if you grab it fast enough. The Shock Attack isn't super useful since it's limited to close range, but it uses less energy than the Blast, so it has its moments. You can really see the beginnings of Insomniac's tradition of having really great weapons in all their games here, something Ratchet & Clank and the Resistance games would later be really well known for. Now, with all of these tools at your disposal, you'd think Disruptor's controls would be a mess, but actually no. Insomniac handles all of these things pretty cleanly with 2 different menus that you can bring up with L2 and R2, kinda like what Metal Gear Solid would do a couple years later. So you always have 1 regular weapon and 1 psionic ability equipped at all times, which can lead to some fun combinations, like the AM Blaster and Drain combo I mentioned earlier. It can also be fun to have Shock and the Cannon equipped to have your close and long-range targets all covered at once. Another major defining characteristic of Disruptor is the multitude of FMV cutscenes sandwiched between levels. Most of these feature our main hero Jack, the talented new recruit being mentored by his older brother. These scenes are small in scope and a little dull at times, but they're fine for what they are. Later on in the game, though, more characters are introduced as a huge military conspiracy starts to unravel and things get a little more interesting. The main villain, President Krieger, quickly steals the show as he's played by Vaughn Armstrong, who you might recognize from Star Trek Enterprise, where he played Maxwell Forrest. I don't want to throw shade at the other actors or anything, but this guy absolutely acts circles around everyone else to an almost comical degree.
I'd offer you a couple of aspirin, but I'm not authorized to prescribe medication.
Amazing.
These full-motion video scenes are obviously corny and dated and low-budget, like all FMVs were at the time. But I think it's worth noting that these are still some of the best FMV sequences from the era, if not the best. I mean, they're lit well, the camera work is solid, and the writing, while not amazing, is more than good enough for a 1996 PS1 game. So I think in the context of the era, they're quite good, and I'd put them up against the FMV scenes we got in Twisted Metal, or Sewer Shark, or certainly Corpse Killer any day. Each level in Disruptor feels unique, and most of them are based on actual planets and moons in our solar system, with lots of little design choices that will correspond with what we actually know about those planets today. Like, for instance, the level that takes place on Jupiter's moon Io is a giant cavernous sulfur mine, which makes sense because we know that Io is mostly composed of iron and sulfur from all of the volcanic activity there. You'll end up in all sorts of places though, from robot-infested rooftops, a weapons lab in Antarctica, whatever the hell this is, ancient Martian ruins, and plenty of other places. Disruptor also features some extremely well-produced orchestral music that sounds like a mix of synthesized and real instruments. Or maybe it's all synthesized, but with just really good chromatically sampled voices. I'm not sure, but either way, it sounds incredible with epic brass parts and the occasional anvil strike that gives certain tracks a terrific cinematic sound. This really elevates and classes up the whole game. Now, some of the platforming can fall apart a little bit when it's mixed with the shooting. Most of the guns blow you backwards a little bit, which does not go well with the more precise platforming sections in later levels when you're being shot at. These moments are few and far between, but they can feel a little bit broken and annoying at times. But that's basically my only complaint. The controls are tank-styled, but strafing with L1 and R1 is perfectly doable if you can get into the right mindset for it. It definitely helps to have grown up with these games back in the day, though. But if you can't hack it, I recommend downloading DuckStation and just remapping the controls to a modern configuration on the DualShock 4 or DualSense, and boom, you can play Disruptor like a modern game, which you should, since it's better than a lot of modern games anyway. Either way though, this is a great PS1 game, it's a great shooter, and it's a fantastic boomer shooter. So if you're a fan of any of those things, you should play it. Now, I've talked about this one before, and I'm more than happy to do it again, because this is one of my all-time favorites. Alien Trilogy is sort of a mishmash of key elements from the first 3 movies in the series, hence the word trilogy in the title, as well as a handful of its own ideas, and it basically cobbles it all together into a classic Doom-style first-person shooter. And it even leans into the horror genre a little bit, as it uses the PS1's short draw distance to its advantage to keep you constantly enveloped in darkness. It's pretty effective, as facehuggers can pop out of crates and scare the bejesus out of you just as effectively as they would in any of the movies. Even the soundtrack seems deliberately produced with horror in mind, as the bombastic James Horner-style orchestra sound is completely avoided here in favor of more simple, eerie tunes that just kind of subtly creep you out. Most importantly though, the shooting here is solid, although it does start off a little bit slow. You're stuck with just the pistol and the shotgun for a bit longer than I would like, although the shotgun is basically top-notch. The weaponry eventually expands into basically everything that you would want from an Alien game, with a smart gun, a flamethrower, and of course the pulse rifle. You never get to use harsh language though, sadly. All the weapons look, sound, and feel pretty much perfect as far as I'm concerned. The slow-moving bullets are a little strange to get used to though. Kinda weird that they did that. I don't know. Later on, as more aliens and even the occasional group of hostile humans are thrown at you, the levels get much bigger and Doom-like. The Doom-style layouts have you unlocking doors so that you can unlock more doors, and repeating that until you reach the end point of the level. Nothing revolutionary. Some stages mix it up a bit though, like bonus areas where you grab as much ammo as possible before time runs out, and the occasional bullet sponge queen battle. You also stumble into the occasional secret area. Movement is a little bit sluggish overall, so the maneuverability you might be expecting after playing Doom or Disruptor isn't really here. Although if you approach it like the pseudo-horror game that it is, it's totally fine. I do think this would be a great candidate for a full-on remaster though. Who knows, maybe with Disney owning the IP now and remastering Star Wars Dark Forces, they'll get around to fixing this one up too. Probably not. Alien Trilogy is a great time, and if you've got a way to play Saturn or PS1 games, either version will do. As long as you're playing Alien Trilogy, you're doing it right. Speaking of Star Wars though, I'm actually fairly new to this game. I happened to recently just come across it at a local game store in my town, and I figured, what the hell, I'll try it out, and holy shnikes is this game rough around the edges. First of all, the variable frame rate is just all over the galaxy. Sometimes it's kinda smooth when there's not much going on, but much more often it is absolutely terrible. The controls are also fundamentally just bad, and to a much greater extent than Disruptor or Alien Trilogy, since strafing isn't mapped to a left and right shoulder button, but just R2. Yeah, R2 alone does all of the strafing. You have to hold it down while using the D-pad to strafe in the desired direction and then let it go to just walk or turn. And this just sucks. I can't even fix it with remapping in DuckStation like I normally do with other games. Ah well, at least you can— oh no, it's Rick Moranis! At least the aiming is pretty generous, with a fairly liberal soft lock on both the X and Y axis, so as long as you're generally aiming towards a target, even if they're pretty far away, your lasers or bullets or whatever will go in their direction. Level layouts here are clearly inspired by Doom, but fail to feel as intriguing to navigate since a lot of the main paths are hidden in what feel like crevices. It almost feels like you're discovering a secret area sometimes, even though, no, you're just going the normal way. I hate not knowing if I'm on a regular path or a secret one, kind of a pet peeve of mine. Missions usually seem to consist of finding a thing, killing a guy, or destroying a thing, and then returning to the landing pad to move on to the next mission, so no matter what, you'll always be doing at least a little bit of backtracking at the end, so you should really do your best to memorize the levels right away, as asinine as their layouts can feel at times. Oftentimes. All the time. Like all Doom clones worth their salt though, there's an overhead map that you can overlay in real time, which does its job by helping make a little bit more sense of the levels, but as far as I can tell, it seems to make the game run even worse, so I don't know, might not be worth it. The 2D cutscenes are okay, I suppose. Kind of a strange choice considering the pre-rendered CG cutscenes and FMVs other games were doing at the time, but I guess they work well enough. They certainly don't look bad, but they do kind of add to this general vibe that Star Wars Dark Forces was meant for an earlier system, like the Atari Jaguar or Sega 32X or something like that. Still, somehow, despite all of the weirdness, I managed to have some fun with this game. Maybe it's because it's my favorite era of Star Wars, somewhere around the original trilogy, or maybe it's just because I really like boomer shooters, I don't know. It's definitely got a charm to it. The Casio keyboard renditions of familiar Star Wars tunes and corny enemy voices make for a fun audio experience as you wander around the levels, unlocking doors, and shooting Empire goons. Now, Night Dive Studios just so happens to have remastered the game very recently, and from what I can tell, seems like they did a really good job with it. Looks like a complete overhaul of basically every element, which is probably the way to go. Either way though, it's a pretty big compliment to the emerging Doom-like formula of the 90s that even LucasArts saw value in putting their own spin on it. While this is easily one of the weaker attempts, I still think there's value in giving this game a whirl at least for a little bit, especially if you're a fan of the genre. It's definitely better than Zero Tolerance, I can definitely say that. Alright, moving into the era of somewhat more standardized frame rates, we have Darkwatch, an old favorite of mine from the PS2. Many might not think of this one as a boomer shooter, but I think it very clearly is one. It's got all the key elements: a solid arsenal of weapons, an abundance of enemies, of which you'll often fight dozens at a time, and lots of wide open areas to leap around in while you hurl dynamite and blow away oodles of undead ding-dongs. Despite being locked at 30 frames, the gameplay feels pretty smooth most of the time, which is more than I can say for a lot of other first-person shooters on the PS2. Capcom and High Moon clearly knew what they were doing with this one, and it shows. High Moon, of course, would go on after this to make the excellent War 4 and Fall of Cybertron games, which I maintain are still the best Transformers games of all time. Jericho Cross is the hero here and has some cool abilities on top of all the gun blazing that make him more than just another FPS hero dude. A big one is the extremely generous double jump that can launch you to most spots that you'll ever want to reach in a single bound. Darkwatch's level designs actually give you a lot of opportunity to use this too, with lots of rooftops and ledges all around. This really adds to the boomer shooteriness for me because of the extra mobility, which, if used to its potential, can make a big difference, especially later in the game, when you're fighting dozens of enemies at a time. You also have Blood Vision, which is just a fancy vampire-y way of highlighting enemies and important items. Oh yeah, Jericho's a vampire too. He's a vampire cowboy. He's a cowboy vampire. Blood Vision is definitely useful, but with how zoomed in the default field of view already is, it kind of limits your peripherals a lot, so you won't want to use it all the time. I mostly just use it after a firefight when I'm just trying to clean up any extra ammo or dynamite sticks that I might have missed. Although sometimes that zoom can come in handy when dealing with guys shooting at you from a distance. And then there's the vampire powers, which really mix things up. As you make bad and good choices throughout the game, which usually just amount to finding one of these guys and making a binary choice as to what to do with them, you add to your good or bad meter. Once either one of those is full, you get a new ability that you can use every time the blood gauge is full, which happens pretty often. These abilities range from kind of basic things like Blood Frenzy that gives Jericho a short window of invincibility, or Silver Bullet that makes bullets a lot stronger for a while, but then there's some more interesting ones like Fear, which makes enemies run away and cower for a little bit, which I have to admit I'm a little bit more amused by than I probably should be. Look at him. What an idiot. Look at that. Look at the little scared. There's several more too, and I really like these abilities, although I tend to kind of forget about them, which is probably more of a me thing than a Darkwatch thing. Darkwatch's graphics and overall presentation are really excellent for the time. There are way better looking games on the PS2 than Darkwatch, but it's its sense of style that I think elevates it. Mixing gothic horror and western cowboy stuff together like this really works better than it should have. Some of the levels do blur together a little bit, I guess, as they all sort of have a similar color palette throughout the entire game basically, but again, it's a style that's really cool and it works, so I think that's okay. Now, the game does have a few small to, I guess, medium-sized flaws that I feel like do need briefly mentioned. Most notably, the enemy variety is not very good. I do enjoy the few types that we get, especially the big fat guys that explode, leaving behind little more than a giant set of bones. But overall, you'll be fighting the same handful of enemies for almost the entire game, which can get a little bit old. And it seems like High Moon was aware of the issue, and they tried to mix things up with stronger, translucent versions of enemies, but it doesn't really help much. In fact, it just kind of highlights the problem in a way. The weapon variety feels about the same, with all the basics, like a pistol, carbine, shotgun, and sniper rifle making an appearance, and like the enemies, I like what's here, but that's about it. The explosive crossbow is cool, but not a great choice in most situations, and you can only have 2 weapons at once, so you'll often find yourself passing this one up. Still, between the vampire powers and a few standout sections where Jericho rides a horse or drives a dune buggy tank thing in third person, there's enough variety here to keep the game from getting stale, at least for me. Darkwatch is an outstanding game overall. It's one of those PS2 games that I can easily recommend to just about anybody, shooter fans or not. The controls hold up just fine if you don't mind a couple of odd button choices, like jumping with triangle, and the graphics still look great with a fun mix of gothic and western themes that go together well. The fact that it's also a chaotic boomer shooter just adds to the appeal. Alright, Area 51. No, not that Area 51. The good one. This game might not seem like a boomer shooter to many, and perhaps it is a little bit more of a stretch to call it one than Darkwatch. But I still think it qualifies in some ways. It's got great weapons, many of which you can dual wield, an intense focus on the action most of the time, and the game throws an absolute avalanche of enemies at you a lot of the time. Now, it doesn't really have the mobility that you might expect from a boomer shooter, and sometimes it can drift into playing more like a standard corridor shooter of the time. Kinda like Red Faction or Project Snowblind, but we'll get to that. Area 51, first and foremost, is a complete reboot of the FMV light gun rail shooter from the previous generation, and it's got almost nothing in common with that game other than the general setting. And Midway put a ton of effort into this one. Great graphics and pretty decent lighting effects, which, in my opinion, hold up pretty damn well. And the voice cast has some pretty notable talent from the era, like Marilyn Manson, Phil Proctor, and even David Duchovny as the main character. The light ray effects on some of the stage titles during load screens seems like a little purposeful nod to the X-Files, which I'm sure David appreciates. Or maybe he thinks it's stupid, I don't know, I don't even know why I said that. While it's cool to hear David Duchovny as a character in a video game about aliens, and it does certainly make sense on paper, I guess, he doesn't give a great performance.
Cray. He dangles a carrot in front of me. Promise of a cure, if I save him.
It's a little overly deadpan, considering the constant craziness unfolding in the game's story. Oh well, he's in the game and it's cool, I guess. The shooting is what matters though, and outside of some ridiculous recoil that takes a little bit of getting used to, I like it. Especially the dual wielding of shotguns and submachine guns. Dual wielding doesn't do your accuracy any favors, but it is available, so you gotta do it whenever possible. That's just a rule. You also have grenades and the occasional turret section, you know, all the standard stuff you would expect from a late PS2 era shooter, and it all works well, with some great ragdoll physics and lots of fire and explosions and other characters moving around a lot of the time. It's a pretty well optimized game, all things considered. Area 51 tries a few interesting things though. One of the biggest things is the mutagen mode after Ethan gets infected with an alien virus that makes people into chimera things, and that is basically their version of the kind of ultra berserk mode, where your strength is enhanced and you can swipe enemies to their death with very little effort. You can also launch these weird parasite sentinel things. And I appreciate the attempt at something a little different, but I don't really like this mode. There are certainly some dedicated sections where it gives you more of an advantage to use it, but outside of those moments, I tend to ignore it as much as the game will let me. I get that they're trying to go for like an Incredible Hulk thing here, with Ethan struggling with his mutant alien side, and I like it as a narrative device, but it's a swing and a miss for me gameplay-wise. For me, the fun in this game is blowing away handfuls of aliens at a time with the game's explosive combat. Unfortunately though, Area 51 loses sight of that as the game goes on more and more. Once it introduces the more humanoid enemies that don't frantically rush at you but just kinda shoot from behind cover, it starts to feel more and more like any other of the shooters from that era, which isn't to say it's bad, it just kinda loses its edge. I mean, I can get this kind of shooting action from almost any other shooter on the PS2. And the other parts of the game are so much fun, so I don't see why these peekaboo shootouts were needed. I really wish they had just stuck with what they were doing in the first couple hours of the game and just stretched that out over the whole thing. Sure, that might have been a little more repetitive, but I'll take fun repetition any day over shoving random generic gameplay styles together in an effort to please a wider array of people, but that's just me. Anyway, even at its lowest, Area 51 is a pretty solid game, and when it's at its best, it's outstanding. Maybe it's a boomer shooter, maybe it's not, but I think at the very least, fans of boomer shooters should give it a try. You'll probably see something you like here.
Almost there.
So there we have it, a handful of great shooters that I refuse to stand by and watch fade into obscurity despite their publishers seemingly being fine with that. All of them could benefit from a remaster, and the only one that's really gotten it is the Star Wars game, which probably deserves it the least. But anyway, they're all very attainable and they're all very playable, especially with the right mindset, and they're all worth spending at least some time with. Feel free to recommend some other shooters that you think might fit into this subcategory, because I'm always looking for new ones to check out. I'm really into these games lately. But until then, as always, thanks for watching.